Hi, I'm Ree from mummyof4.com. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am sharing 11 signs that you may want to look out for that may indicate that your child has autism. I just want to start by saying I'm not a doctor. I am a mum of 2 children who have an autism diagnosis. My youngest is currently going through the assessment process. So although I'm not a trained professional in the area of autism, I do have a fair amount of knowledge and experience when it comes to ASD. So all of the signs of autism to look out for that I mention in this video could possibly indicate your child has autism. They could have lots of the signs and still not get a diagnosis of autism. They could just have 1 or 2 of these signs and still get an autism diagnosis. Really, the purpose of this video is just to make you aware of perhaps what you might want to look out for as a parent, to help you decide whether you want to take that step into potentially getting assessment for your child. So really the purpose of this video is just to make you aware of perhaps what you might want to be on the lookout for, and if your child is showing some of these signs or symptoms, it may be worth speaking to your child's school or healthcare provider to look into the possibility of getting your child assessed, because it's really only an assessment that can tell you categorically if your child has autism or not. So the first sign that you might want to look out for is what's referred to as spiky development. This would be where your child is doing perhaps well in some areas and then not so well in other areas. And this can be applied in so many different ways. So I'll just use an example of how it kind of displayed in my son to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So when William was about to start school, I was very worried about him. He was about to start school the term after his 3rd birthday, which is what happens in the area in which we live, and he could already read. So this was not something that you would consider standard for a child that has only just turned 3. That's really, really advanced. However, in other ways, he was perhaps younger than his age in a developmental sense. So while he could read, he wasn't conversing fluently. He wasn't showing the typical social skills you would expect for a child of his age, but yet in other ways he was very advanced, which shows this very spiky pattern. Now, not all children with autism have these kind of gifts, like William had this kind of gift with being able to read at a very young age, and I think that's a little bit of a misconception sometimes. So if rather than having consistent development and doing everything at about the same level, their speech and language and physical skills, fine motor skills, gross motor skills, all being at roughly the same level, if some are much higher and some are much lower, that's considered spiky development, and it might be worth talking to your healthcare provider about. The next sign to look out for that may indicate that your child has autism is eye contact, or more to the point, lack of it. Lots of children with autism find it very difficult to make eye contact and don't tend to look at you while they're speaking to you. Now, as autism is a spectrum, and all children and adults for that matter on the spectrum are very, very different, just because your child does make eye contact doesn't mean that they don't have autism. For example, my daughter Bella, who was diagnosed just after her 5th birthday, makes eye contact, but was given a diagnosis of autism. So eye contact is something to look out for, but just because they make eye contact doesn't mean it's not autism. The next sign to look out for is use of scripted speech. And this is using chunks of speech, generally learnt from songs, films, TV shows, things like that, and using those chunks of speech in their day-to-day lives, sometimes in play and sometimes in place of conversation. So William would use chunks of things he'd memorized from Peppa Pig. He would recite things as he was playing. Rather than playing spontaneously, he would just recite entire episodes of things. He would have memorized them and recite them word for word and act them out, and this would be considered scripted speech. He would also reply to me if I was talking to him using a line from Peppa Pig rather than words he'd just put together himself. So if your child, you feel, is doing this, it might be worth talking to your health visitor or school. The next one is hand over hand, which is something I'd only ever heard of after William was diagnosed. And this is where your child will use your hands as sort of like a tool. So rather than bringing you something, say that they wanted help with opening or fixing, they would grab your hand and try and utilize your hand as a tool. So rather than actually asking you to do it, they'd be more like, this hand needs to do this thing. So if your child is really grabbing your hand and trying to get your hand to do things rather than requesting for you to do things, that might be a sign of autism. The next sign to look out for is pointing and use of gesture, or again, lack of it. So I use quite a lot of gesture and I talk with my hands quite a lot. People with autism tend not to do this so much. Also pointing. Does your child point at things to show you things? Do they point with direction? And this is just something that if you are asked it off the top of your head, it's often quite difficult to figure out, does my child do this? And this is something I struggled with, I think, in health visitor meetings and things when they were quite little. If you're asked a question you're not really prepared for, does your child point at things? You're like, does my child point at things? I don't really know. Whereas if you're kind of given a list of things to look out for, and then over the days and weeks, you look out for them, you're far more likely to kind of get an accurate answer. So it's well worth, there is a blog post to go with this video, reading over it and just looking back over the list over the course of a number of days or weeks to really see, does my child actually do this? Because so much of what we kind of see and do with our children as parents, it just becomes second nature that we don't necessarily notice what they are and are not doing because we're used to their little ways, but we don't necessarily know the answers to these questions when we're put on the spot by health visitors. The next thing to look out for that may indicate that your child has autism, is on the autism spectrum, is social difficulties. So this could be just difficulty socialising with other children their age. Often children with autism are much better with adults than they are with children their own age. This is definitely something that I found. Children with autism will often find it difficult to understand sarcasm or humour. They'll find it hard to know when people are joking and often will take things very, very literally. So for example, if you say to a child with autism, hop into the car, they may literally think that they have to hop to get into the car and not realise that it's not something to be taken very literally. Children with autism can often find that they don't enjoy situations that children of their age would typically enjoy, like birthday parties and things like that. So if your child you feel is struggling, especially with socialising with children of their own age, it may be worth asking your healthcare professionals whether it's worth getting them assessed. The next little tell to look out for is stimming behaviours. Now these can be repetitive movements, could be flapping, it could be tics such as noises they make with their mouth, things that they shake with their heads. It could be any form of repetitive behaviour that the child finds comforting. So while I don't think my children have done a lot of flapping generally, it's something that perhaps if they were having a meltdown, and that's something we'll get to again, that they might be more likely to do. William did go through a phase, and some of these stimming behaviours can be phases. William did go through a phase when he was much smaller of shaking his head really, really violently wherever he was walking. So it was making him dizzy. But it's something that he was doing. He did it for quite a long time. And it would cause him to bump into things and cause himself injury. But this would be an example of a stimming behaviour. Something that my youngest daughter does, the one that is currently in the process of being assessed, she bounces off things. If you've ever seen Sonic the Hedgehog, that's like doing, 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 off all of the corners of the walls. She runs into things, bounces off them, and then runs into something else and bounces off that. It's not a constant thing, but she goes through phases and probably does it at some point of every day. The next thing that children with autism may struggle with is sensory issues. Lots of people with autism really struggle with certain textures, certain tastes. Scratchy labels are a very common thing that lots of parents report, and I know that my children really struggle with this. Dressing up costumes especially that can have more scratchy seams and things they never want to wear next to their skin. They have to wear a t-shirt or something underneath them. I have to cut the labels out of things. Nothing can be scratchy because it's like they're much, much more sensitive to anything itchy, scratchy or uncomfortable. Something else that could be a sign of autism is aversion to loud noises. Now, for my older children, this is not something that they have been struggling with. My youngest daughter, who does not yet have a diagnosis, is more sensitive to loud noises. It's not a constant thing, but quite often she will fall asleep with her headphones on just to block out noise, or she'll just want to wear them while she's playing. We were at a birthday party the other day and halfway through she just couldn't cope with the noise and we had to leave the room. So it's something that not all people with autism will struggle with, but some definitely will. Children with autism can often be very rigid when it comes to routines and rituals. Now, most children tend to thrive with an element of routine. It makes them feel like their life can be predicted. It makes them feel secure and safe. But children with autism really rely on this routine. So if your child really struggles, if your plans change, really needs certain rituals in order to get through the day, if you feel like you really need to prepare them for doing anything new because they're just going to really spin out and find it very difficult to adjust without a lot of preparation, this could be a sign that they are on the autism spectrum. Children with autism can often have very niche interests, so this could be anything from cars, Thomas the Tank Engine, to planets, to a certain type of animal. And children with autism often become very engrossed and very fixated on a certain topic or toy or film or book or whatever it might be, and they like to know everything about this in massive amounts of detail. Now, just because your child has an obsession does not mean they have autism, but if they have very niche interests that they want to talk about endlessly, even when other people have clearly lost interest, it could be a sign, especially if it's coupled with any of the other things I've talked about in this video. Now, a big indicator that your child may actually have autism is if they have meltdowns. Now, to the untrained eye, meltdowns can look an awful lot like tantrums, which can be really difficult for parents because often they get lots of other people with very judgy, eye-rolling kind of reactions, thinking, oh, so can't you parent your child? Whereas actually an autism meltdown is different to a tantrum. It's more like the child feels like their world is imploding because something is scratchy or the routine is out of place or whatever it might be that set off the meltdown. It's generally one of the other things I talked about in this video that causes a meltdown. A big difference I find between meltdowns and tantrums is that a tantrum can be resolved reasonably quickly. And I'm not suggesting that giving in to tantrums is a really good idea, but generally if a child is having a tantrum because they want a toy or a sweet or whatever it might be, if you give them that thing, the tantrum will generally end quite quickly and they'll kind of get over it quite quickly. Whether it's a good idea to do this or not is entirely another matter, but just for the purpose of illustrating this point, a tantrum will generally be resolved when the child gets what they're after and the tantrum has in effect served its purpose. However, with a meltdown is less for a reaction from other people and it's more like the child feels like their world is imploding. And even if you resolve whatever it is and their routine is fixed or whatever is out of place is put back or whatever it might be, whatever the reason for the meltdown is resolved, they may still find it very difficult to calm down from that. They may be having physical reactions. They could be very hot, very stressed, increased stimming, that kind of thing. So with a meltdown, it does take a longer time to recover from it than a tantrum, generally in my experience. So if your child is showing any of these symptoms and you're comfortable to share that down in the comments, please do so. Let me know if you have gone down the assessment process route with your child, if that's something you're looking into. And look out for an upcoming video very soon, which I will link below when it's live, about whether you should get your child assessed or not, and lots of the concerns that parents generally have before embarking upon the assessment process. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. There are lots more videos on screen, including a playlist dedicated to autism and our family's experience, and hopefully some of that will be helpful to you. Thank you so much. I shall see you in the next video. Bye.